This presentation covers thesis statements. It also covers the objective, formulate a clear thesis statement that states your attitude or opinion and is supported by specific evidence. Before we learn how to create a thesis statement, we must understand what a thesis statement is. A thesis statement states your argument or main point and outlines your supporting points. The thesis also provides a map of the organization of your essay. The thesis is usually the last sentence of your introductory paragraph. It is acceptable to use two sentences in your thesis statement if you cannot capture it in one. A thesis can also be implied or explicit. An implied thesis is not directly stated, but the reader should be able to understand the argument. An explicit statement clearly states the argument. Now let's discuss creating thesis statements. Before you create a thesis statement, you must understand the essay prompt assigned if you are assigned a prompt. Ask yourself what the prompt is asking you to do. Note that most college essays are argumentative essays. We will go into more detail on this later. One thing that is helpful in creating a thesis statement is deciding what you want to know. What is your research question? Let's say you decide to write a paper on global warming. Perhaps your research question is, what causes global warming? You also want to know how we can decrease global warming. After you do some preliminary research and have some answers to your question, you can move into creating an argument for your thesis. So you have discovered some answers to your questions through preliminary research and have now formed an opinion about global warming. You believe that the greenhouse gases in things such as cars, factories, and electricity production cause global warming, and that by using alternative energy, the effects of global warming could be decreased. Now that we have an argument, we need to decide what points we will make to support our argument. Some subpoints could be using alternative fuel options like biofuel in vehicles to decrease emissions. Also, alternative energy like wind energy could be used for electricity to decrease the use of fossil fuels. Now we have enough information to create a thesis statement. The emissions which cause global warming could be reduced by using alternative energy sources such as biofuel and wind energy. Let's take things a step further. Now we have a basic understanding regarding what a thesis is and how to create one. Let's discuss the different types of essays as this will determine how you approach your thesis. While most college essays are argumentative, I am going to discuss a few different types of essays you may be asked to write. The first is an analytical essay, which analyzes an issue or idea by breaking it down into smaller parts. The second type is an expository essay that explains something to the reader. And finally, we have the argumentative essay that makes a claim or argument. This type of essay usually asks you to state your opinion on a topic, so there must be multiple sides to the argument. In addition, sometimes you are trying to convince or persuade your reader to agree with you. As mentioned earlier, this is the most common type of college essay. Now that we have a good understanding of some of the types of essays, let's discuss some tips for creating a solid thesis statement. First, your thesis must be specific. Do not include any information in your thesis that you do not plan to write about. For instance, if you are writing about global warming and found a source that discusses using resources from space, but you don't plan to write about that in your essay, do not mention it in the thesis. In addition to making your thesis specific, the thesis is usually the last sentence of the first paragraph. In some cases, the thesis extends to two sentences. When the thesis is the last sentence or sentences of the paragraph, it is easier for the reader to identify it and follow your argument. As writers, it is imperative that we revise. While we may begin our essay thinking we know exactly what we want to argue and how we will present that information, As we continue our research and begin writing our essay, we may discover new information that changes or redirects our thesis. The first thesis you create is what we call a working thesis, as it may change as you begin writing. Keeping these tips in mind, let's look at a few examples of thesis statements for the different essay types we discussed earlier. Here is an example of an analytical thesis. After reviewing the GPA and course completion of students who took the refresher courses, two things are evident. Students who complete the courses earn a higher GPA, and students who complete the courses complete their coursework and graduate. Remember, an analytical essay analyzes something. After reading the thesis statement, the reader would assume that the paper would then explain the analysis of the GPA of students who complete the refresher courses and explain the analysis of students who complete the refresher course and graduate on time with honors. Here is an example of an expository thesis. Most stay-at-home mothers spend their time tending to their children, cleaning the home, and shuttling their children to activities. Remember, an expository thesis explains something. After reading the thesis statement, the reader would assume that the paper would then explain how mothers spend their time tending to their children, cleaning the home, and shuttling their children to activities. Finally, we have an example of an argumentative thesis. All able-bodied individuals should be required to participate in some form of military service at the age of 18 or after high school graduation. Such participation in the military will teach the individuals discipline, motivation, and courage. This essay is arguing a position on a topic, specifically enrollment in the military for able-bodied persons age 18 or high school graduates. After reading the thesis statement, the reader would assume that the paper would present an argument and give evidence to support the argument that all able-bodied individuals of the age of 18 or equivalent should participate in military service and how military service teaches discipline, motivation, and courage. Let's look at a few more tips for creating strong argumentative thesis statements. There are three things a strong argumentative thesis must have. It must be debatable. You cannot argue something most people would take as fact or something they would generally agree or disagree with. The thesis must be narrow enough to adequately cover the topic. And it must provide a map that guides the reader. As mentioned, your thesis cannot be a black and white issue. There must be room for disagreement with the opinion argued. An example of a non-debatable thesis is, smoking is bad for one's health. Even people who smoke would acknowledge that smoking is bad for your health. There is plenty of evidence to prove this as well. A debatable thesis would be, smoking in public places should be banned. This is an argument that many would disagree with. Therefore, it is a debatable argument. Another debatable thesis for this topic could be, banning smoking in public places is infringing on individuals' civil rights. In addition to being debatable, the thesis must be narrow. Here is a broad thesis statement. Energy drinks are dangerous. Okay, so how are they dangerous and to whom are they dangerous? Everyone? Some people? Are we talking about all energy drinks or just some? These are just some questions that are open because this thesis is too broad. Here, the thesis has been narrowed down. Energy drinks are dangerous to children and can have dramatic effects on their health. In this narrower version, the focus is on the dangerous effect of energy drinks on children and their health. In addition to having a debatable and narrow thesis, the thesis should also provide a map that guides the reader. After reading the thesis, the reader should have a general idea of the organization of the essay. Here's an example of a thesis that does not provide a map for the reader. Energy drinks are dangerous to children and can have dramatic effects. So from reading this, I would assume the essay would be about dramatic effects. But what are the effects and why are they dramatic? Take a look at this thesis. Energy drinks are dangerous to children and can have dramatic effects on their health, such as increased heart rates, stunting their growth, and disturbing their sleep patterns. This thesis clearly outlines the subtopics and the organization of the essay. Let's go back to our topic on smoking. Here is an unguided thesis. Smoking in public places should be banned. Why? By providing the reader with a map, we can understand why and also see where this essay will go in terms of its arguments. Smoking in public places should be banned because of the dangers of secondhand smoke, specifically to young children and elderly persons. After reading this thesis, the writer would expect the essay to first discuss the dangers of secondhand smoke, the dangers of secondhand smoke in children, and the dangers of secondhand smoke in elderly persons. Let's look at another example. Let's say you are assigned an argumentative essay and you need to pick a controversial topic and argue your position. The topic you chose is the death penalty. After doing some preliminary research, it is your opinion that the death penalty should be abolished. Before you can write your thesis, you need to decide what subpoints you will argue. After some careful consideration, you decide to argue that the death penalty does not deter crime, the executions carry a large expense for taxpayers, innocent people have been convicted and executed, and finally, life without parole is a good alternative. Now we have a main argument and subpoints. Let's create a thesis. Remember, the thesis should sum up your main ideas and show your subpoints or arguments. A thesis statement for the sample essay topic might sound like this. The death penalty should be abolished because it does not deter crime, executions are a large expense for taxpayers, innocent people have been executed, and life without parole is a sufficient alternative. Now that we have a strong thesis statement, we should discuss how the thesis acts as a map or guide for the essay's organization. We will use our death penalty topic again. First, you need to introduce your topic. You can do this by sharing a story, some historical facts, or whatever you feel best suits your topic. The last sentence of your introductory paragraph should be your thesis statement. The first subpoint in the thesis is on how the death penalty does not deter crime, so this should be the first topic you discuss in your essay. In this paragraph, you would go into detail, maybe share some statistics on how the death penalty does not deter crime. The second subpoint is on the cost of executions. In this paragraph, you would describe the cost and burden of costs on the taxpayers in relation to executions. The third subpoint in the thesis regards innocent people who have been executed. To support this argument, it would be helpful to find actual cases where wrongly convicted individuals were executed. The final subtopic should discuss life without parole as a sufficient alternative. Being as the cost of execution has already been raised, it would also be helpful to show the cost of life without parole is less than the cost of execution. Finally, we need a conclusion that sums up the arguments and restates the thesis in a different way. We now have a basic outline for the essay that follows the organization of the thesis, but in order to fully support the thesis, you need evidence. In order to back up the arguments in your thesis and your subpoints, you need supporting evidence. Supporting evidence can be facts like statistical data that you find through your research. You should use sourced information that you find in your research. Using arguments or ideas set forth by experts on the topic you are writing about helps to show that your arguments are sound and reasonable. Personal observations are also helpful in supporting your thesis because it is likely that your own observations led you to argue the topic. When you use personal observations, it is a good idea to back up your observations or ideas with supporting evidence from your sources. Using the sources as experts only makes your argument stronger. Having a strong thesis statement with supporting evidence will help you to write an effective essay. And this concludes our presentation.